welcome to our next English Mind Way podcast episode. My name is Martina Weifenbach and I am excited to be here today with Professor Dr. David Spencer. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome. I'm really excited about this episode today, David. In this Mind Way podcast, we discuss mindfulness, innovation, and new ways to work. The Mind Way podcast is for leaders, visionaries, and everyone who wants to shape their workplaces mindfully. With our amazing guests, we touch upon the latest in science and discuss practical insights to help you pack your toolbox to design a more mindful workplace. Usually, and some of you might already know this, we choose one word that guides our conversation, and the word today will be vision. Allow me to briefly introduce David. David A. Spencer is Professor of Economics and Political Economy at the University of Leeds. His research interests lie in the areas of the economics and political economy of work. He retains a particular interest in the possibilities for work time reduction, and his latest book on the meaning and future of work is entitled Making Light Work, an End to Toil in the 21st Century. Wow, exciting, great title, I love it. And maybe, David, you can enlighten us. Where does your research passion begin? Where did it all start?
Okay, well, I think my research starts with an interest in work. So work is the focus of my research. When I research and study work, I think about it in terms of its quantity and its quality. So I'm interested in the nature of work, and also interested in the quantity of work, and that relates to things like the duration of working time, how long we work. Why? Because work shaped me. It forms me on a daily basis. It's affected who I am. I'm interested in how it shapes other people as well. So I think work for me is a central life activity. It's important that we study it. It's affected me personally. I've seen how it's affected others. It's an important area of study. So it interests me, it motivates me, and it inspires me to do the research that I do.
Thank you very much for sharing this. And I think that ties perfectly to the next question, because I chose vision as our guiding word today in terms of future vision. And you just said you're interested in work. And I think in a way you're also interested in maybe thinking about how work shapes our future, all of our future. So what is your future vision for the workplace?
Well, I'll start off by saying vision's a good word. And vision is something we ought to think about. I think it's important for us to have some sort of vision of the future, something which can inspire us, motivate us to do things, to inspire us to act, inspire us to go forward. So I'm glad you've chosen the word vision. It can motivate us, inspire us, give us hope for the future. My own work is driven by some vision. I think for me, the vision I have in my head is of making work lighter, of lightening work. So you mentioned my book earlier. My book is called Making Light Work. And that has a double meaning, in the sense of making light work means reducing the hours we work, so achieving a better work-life balance, allowing us to have a life beyond work. But also I'm interested in making work lighter in a qualitative sense, making the work that we do more pleasurable, more valuable, more meaningful. So that vision of creating a future of less and better work motivates me, provides a vision for my work. And that vision infuses my research. It's there to the fore in my book. So making light work for all would be a vision for me.
I have to say, I read your title and I had to read it a couple of times because I didn't really know where to put the emphasis. And for me, the emphasis was on the word light.
Yeah.
And I was first thinking, is it about enlightening or is it bringing light to the workplace? And I liked both of these ideas. And then I thought, maybe you mean lighter work. And that was my last go-to solution. But I like all angles because I think they open up opportunities. They open up ways of thinking about the future of work. And I think they're an invitation to actually envision another kind of work. That's how I kind of read your title and also, understood your message from my personal perspective. So I like that very much. I think what you're also talking about in the book is your research on the 4-day work week. And that's a topic that's really discussed widely at the moment, also in Germany. So maybe you can share a little bit about your research on that. What are your key findings, or what do you think are the most valuable contributions that especially practice can take away from this?
Yep, I think you're right to say that there's a growing interest in the 4-day week. I started working on the 4-day week about 10, 15 years ago, where it was seen as a sort of crazy idea which no business would ever adopt. But now, lots of businesses around the world are adopting it. There's lots of trials and experiments going on. So it's an idea which has moved from the fringes to the sort of centre of debate about work reform across the world. So there's lots of experiments with firms adopting a 4-day week. For me, it has multiple benefits, and that's what's always driven my interest in it. So, my background is economics. I think about the economic advantages of work time reduction, that we can produce the same amount by working fewer hours. The 5-day working week may not be as efficient, may not be as productive as a 4-day week. It sounds contradictory, but the hours that we work at the moment are not necessarily motivating us to work more. They may be having adverse effects upon morale, motivation, maybe leading to ill health, and that if we work less, we might produce the same. So there may be some productivity advantage from working less. But there's multiple other benefits of us having more time for ourselves, more free time, more time with our friends and family, more time for ourselves to, pursue hobbies and things like that, have a life beyond work. Other angles around the sort of ecological benefits of working less, how a 4-day week can fit with a sustainability agenda. Carbon emissions can be reduced through working less. There's some quite now robust evidence on that. Commute times can fall. There can be shifts in consumption, scope for more sustainable futures. Other benefits are things like have more time for us to give to our communities, more time for volunteering and those sorts of things. I think there's multiple benefits from a 4-day week, which suggests that we all keep these experiments and indeed create more space for more experiments. Well, it's part of that vision again, I think, that vision of the future, lighter work would be consistent with moving towards a 4-day week.
I agree. And I think also, I think the hardest part really is persuading people who make the decisions about the workplace, about working hours. And I think I can just speak from my experience. We work with mindfulness, we work with mental well-being. And I mean, there are a lot of studies who show that the investment on mental well-being leads to a return, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy for me to persuade CEOs of large corporations. And I was thinking, I can imagine that you have a similar challenge to persuade decision makers, even though your studies and your research shows that there are actually a lot of benefits to be taken away from this. So how do you think you would, or you can translate your findings to, let's say, the real world, to industries, to large corporations?
I mean, my advice to a CEO would be to experiment in it. Be brave, try it, see what happens. Lots of companies around the world now are adopting it. Large companies, Microsoft experimented with it in Japan, only temporarily. There's lots of other small companies who are adopting it. And the evidence is positive. The evidence is revealing that businesses can thrive by cutting the working week. If it's evidence you need, there is evidence out there. If you want to create a better world as a CEO, maybe think about reducing work time. adopting a 4-day week. I mean, the other thing to say is that if we sort of look at history briefly, we can see that over time work hours have fallen. We used to work 6 days a week. We used to work over 70 hours a week. That's fallen over time. Over the last 20 or 30 years, work hours have plateaued. The rate of decline has slowed. There's some variation across countries, but there's been a slowing down in that trend. So the productivity which has been achieved in the economy has not necessarily fed through to shorter work hours. But that's anomalous, and it's not something which is natural or inevitable. We can restore the trend towards shorter work hours. We can use more of that productivity gain to work less, and CEOs can be at the forefront of making those changes. Employers in the past have led changes. Henry Ford was, back in the 1920s, adopted a shorter work time pattern in order to improve productivity, and it worked. That led to emulation in other firms and led to a reduction in work time across the economies. The hope would be that if other firms adopt a 4-day week, there'll be an emulation effect and other firms will adopt it. And just back to evidence, it's clear that firms who are offering a 4-day week, they can attract really good workers. That it becomes a way to attract good workers, also retain them. On a negative side, it reduces things like burnout, where people are working long hours and are not able to work more, and there's costs for firms. Those costs can be potentially combated through a 4-day week. So my advice would be, try it, be brave.
Yeah, I think that's what I was just thinking. It has something to do with courage, right? And in my opinion, I'm a CEO of a smaller company still, but I think being an entrepreneur, a CEO, always means being a visionary, going ahead and having courage, to adopt something new and to maybe sometimes even revise what you're doing. And I think that's something I would like to add. Be brave, as you just said, or, well, not add, but you just said it, just maybe point out, be brave, try something new. And a thought that just came to my mind, because I have this discussion a lot as well, is, but can we kind of provide this new solution to everyone in the workplace? Is it the same for blue collar and white collar? And does this actually work? What's your take on this? What's your thought on this?
Okay, I think that's a really good question. What I would say is that it can be achieved across the economy as a whole. Why do I say that? Because we know from history that we shifted from a 6-day week to a 5-day week. And the economy adapted to that change. There's no reason why the economy can't be adapted from a 5-day week to a 4-day week. When I say that, though, I'm not suggesting it can be done overnight. It's not something, we can't, immediately go from where we are now to a 4-day week. It will take time. It'll be an evolutionary, incremental process. I think, though, it would be good for us to have that as a target. This is where I think government is important in terms of promoting the idea. Business has a role as well in terms of embracing it. It'd be good to have it as part of the discourse around business reform and responsible business, to have some focus on work time reduction. So we may envisage that by 2050, we might then achieve a 4-day week. Have that as a target, a societal goal, and create some consensus about that. And in that sense, try and move towards and realize that goal. When I say it will take time, it will involve changes in sort of the way that society functions, the way that sort of schools, just to give one example, the coordination between work time and school time, trying to ensure that activities are coordinated across the economy. I mean, often you hear these sort of scare stories around, will hospitals close? There'll be no hospital services on a Friday or something like that. I think they're scare stories in the sense we'd ensure that there would be cover. We'd have to vary shift patterns. but there's some provision of services, and it's not impossible to achieve. I think that's my point. But it will take time. It will take some adjustment, but it's possible.
To me, it sounds a little bit like a lot of shifting of mindsets. I would almost argue that the way we work and the hours we work are a mindset. It's like that's how much you have to work in order to be accepted in the workplace. I remember working as a consultant there; it was even worse. And at the same time, what I'm hearing from you as well, it's actually a chance also to allow for more diversity, to allow for more people to participate in the workplace. Because I mean, I'm a mother. I know how hard it is to work during regular hours. And I think that would be also a chance for mothers, for parents, or for people who are just not as capable of as others of working 60, 70 hours a week. And I'm exaggerating now, I know, but I think that's a huge benefit as well, like in terms of employer attractiveness, but also in terms of knowledge management, innovation, and basically developing businesses further.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of issues you raise there. To pick up on the last one in terms of innovation, if we're not tired out by work, but more focused and more engaged with the work, we may then be able to come up with better ideas about how we organise work. So innovation may be facilitated through working less rather than more, because we're more focused. You raised the issue of cultural barriers to working less. I think they're very important. Yeah, I omitted to mention them. I think that there's the issue of the normalisation of working long hours and challenging that. The work ethic as well, the idea that we're defined by work when, we have lives beyond work, and reducing work time recognises that space beyond work. And those roles can differ in terms, it can involve caring responsibilities, and it can also involve activities, more leisure type activities. Another argument for work time reduction is that it can challenge existing gender norms. So the idea would be, this is an idea, not necessarily realised in all cases, the idea would be that it would challenge in existing gender roles that men would do more caring work, take on more caring responsibilities, because they've got more time to devote to that. Well, I'm sceptical about that, because I think it would involve broader shifts in our culture. Yeah, but I think in the sense that men may do more hobbies and women just do the same or more caring responsibilities. There have been some studies which have shown that. I think in Germany there has been some studies of reductions in work time where men seem to have more free time, but women don't. That raises another issue. I think that work time reduction is no silver bullet. It's no panacea. It can help, though, to start challenging and rethinking these norms. Men have less excuse to not do caring responsibilities if they're working less. So it creates the opportunity for that, a shift in norms and the culture, existing culture. It may also be then that women do more regular work, yeah, in the sense that, it's not men who monopolise all the long hours jobs, but you get a levelling down in the average, but some change in the distribution across men and women.
I have to say, I see a lot of readiness from men, at least in my peer group, to kind of adopt these approaches. And what I see from a lot of these men is that they are still kind of in a position where they're not entirely sure if they can express, for instance, in the workplace, that they want to reduce their hours in order to take on more care work. So maybe it would facilitate the conversation around these shifts in society in general, but also kind of give a permission to couples in general to distribute the care work in different ways. And I think that's something a whole society, future society, talking about vision again, would benefit from, like having both parents more frequently, and at the same time having kind of two faces to talk to on a regular basis, but also different kinds of conversations as we grow up with both parents. But let's maybe shift back to something you just said, which I would like to touch upon as well, which is there are probably intercultural differences in how working hours are perceived. I've recently been to the US and I've had a lot of conversations about holidays and sick days and the whole regulation about days off, which is so different from the German system that I always have to ask a lot of questions. And I would assume that there is also a kind of difference in the readiness to adopt the 4-day work week in different countries. What's your take on this? And can you give us maybe any examples of countries that are going ahead that already provide like good examples for us to follow?
I think it's important to say at the outset that there are quite marked differences between work time in different countries. So German workers tend to work shorter working weeks than American workers. American workers tend to work longer hours per year than German workers. There's differences in Europe between, say, the UK, longer hours than Germany. Interestingly, just as an aside, Germany is one of the few countries, and I think this is right, who have not got any sort of formal trials of the 4-day week. It's, the UK, Canada, Ireland, Spain, but not Germany. Maybe because they don't need it. I don't know, but we can get onto that. I think there's reasons for those differences, then highlights conditions which are favourable to work time reduction. Yeah. So, I mean, differences in culture and politics to reduce it down to its sort of two bare essential ideas. On the politics side, there's the idea that in, say, Germany, like France as well, you could bring in the Nordic countries like Sweden, there's stronger organisation from unions, stronger pressure to reduce work hours, and that's allied with labour regulations which support work time reduction and also support things like, I focus a lot on the length of the working week. There's also things, and you mentioned this as well, I think, in terms of entitlement to paid holiday. So entitlement to paid holiday is much more generous in Europe than it is in America, and that explains the difference in annual work hours. I think in America there is no formal entitlement to paid leave. I think that's the case. So there may be a sort of employer level you can get some entitlement, but there is no national level entitlement. And that reflects the political context. Weaker unions in the States, laxer labour regulations. And under those conditions, you've got longer hours rather than shorter hours. Workers are not in a position to demand and secure cuts in work hours because they're not strong. They haven't got bargaining strength. It will vary industry by industry, but power matters in that sense. The other was around culture. I think there's a stronger cultural norm around work and working, stronger norms around consumption in the US, a less strong norm around leisure, as in spending time with your family. Things like cooking meals, preparing, having dinner together and that sort of thing, as opposed to, say, buying convenience food and fast food, which reflects a fast lifestyle, which reflects a lifestyle where work dominates. So there's cultural norms which favour leisure seeking in Europe, which are not in existence to the same extent in the US. The danger with this is that you start stereotyping, but I think there are, though, different political and cultural factors in the US and Germany which explain the differences in work hours outcomes between those two countries. And you can also see the difference between Europe and the North America, the US.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was just really thinking about the meal, because I think that's a really good symbol. When I lived in the US, I was always wondering, why do people not sit down together to have a meal together? And I remember having lunches in New York with my CEO back then, and he would get the bill as he was eating. And then when we were done, he was rushing out already and I was still chewing. And I was like, wow, that's the worst way for me to eat. I love eating so much. And I felt like, how we don't even have time to enjoy that. Well, yeah, thanks for that. Thanks also for just contrasting it. I think one thing is to be very aware of stereotyping, but I think another thing is to really look at differences and just compare and also learn from each other without the stereotyping. But as we talk about stereotypes, I'm just going to use another stereotype because I want to get a little more personal. I remember while I was doing my PhD and while I was doing my postdoc, I had a contract, and the contract said, those are your working hours. But I've actually never matched my working hours. So now you're a researcher as well. You've stayed in academia for a very long time. You're researching on a topic you're very passionate about. But how do you put your findings into practice? How do you make it real?
Okay, well, I'm sat in my office still at 7:30 at night, so that itself indicates that I'm not staying true to my principles all of the time. The joke I have with my family is that I'm working on working less. I'm trying to work less, but work gets in the way of me working less. Okay, I do things which prevent me from overworking. I try to take weekends off. When I did my PhD, as you mentioned before, 20 years ago, I purposely took Sundays off, not for any religious reason, but more for me to rest, to recuperate. And I found that my productivity was higher because working 7 days didn't produce the same as working 6 days. I didn't work 5 days. I worked too much, but I had to do it. I think in my own case, I feel I'm lucky in the sense that I've got some flexibility over when I work. I've got some autonomy. I can determine to some degree the hours that I work. My formal hours are 37.5 hours per week. I work more than that, but a lot of my work, I guess, is self-motivated work, research and those sorts of things, which I probably would do if I wasn't getting paid to do what I'm doing. The book you mentioned, I probably would have written that anyway, but I was fortunate enough to be able to combine it with my paid work. The bottom line is I work too much. I should work less. That creates regret, I guess. Things that I've not done that I could have done. But then the thing which I think about when I think about that is that some of my work's self-motivated. So in that sense, I would have done it in any case. I guess it's that blurring between work and leisure for me.
Yeah, I remember those times. I'm still writing books, and I'm an entrepreneur, so I talk about mental well-being and taking time off, making breaks, and at the same time, I sometimes work more than everyone else I'm talking to in large corporations. But yeah, I totally understand when you're driven by something and when you believe in what you do, I call it a sense of purpose, then the motivation just comes from somewhere else and it's not extrinsic, it's intrinsic. And I think that's in a way really good, but sometimes it can also be kind of self-harming if you don't know when to stop.
Just to comment, I think I agree with that. I think the key is not to allow the work to dominate you and to be the only thing that marks you out from other people. You've got to have a life beyond work. I think that's the point, in the sense that don't allow work to define you. And that said, work's very important. Work can bring meaning and purpose to your life. It can be one of the most meaningful things in your life. But hey, we can do lots of other things as well. I can look after my daughters, help my family, be with them and do things with them. So that's, and with my friends, I can also do things myself beyond work, like, I don't know, play sport or something. I used to play, I don't anymore, I'm too old, but those sorts of things. So yeah, having a life beyond work matters.
Yeah, I think that's really important and a strong sentence. And yeah, it's important to remind yourself every day to take some time to carve out some time to just be yourself, like be yourself without work, without the role that might define you more than you think. Let's come back to the vision and let's dream for a moment. Keynes dreamed of fewer working hours in 2030. That's 7 years to go. And what do you think, if we realize the 4-day work week until then, how would the life, the professional life of a working mom look like, or a team leader, or a CEO? You can just pick one, or maybe choose another person. But how would the work life of that person look like in a couple of years from now, maybe even tomorrow?
Okay, I'll start by saying that Keynes' essay, 1930 essay, should be widely read. So CEOs who are listening, get hold of it and read it. It's very short, but it's incredibly inspiring. And it has a vision. It offers a vision of the future. So Keynes' dream, he looks forward in the essay to 2030, as you said, 7 years away. He didn't envisage a 4-day week. He envisaged a working week of 15 hours. That was his hope. He thought that we would be able to reach a 15-hour working week. How would that be achieved? It'd be achieved through technological progress. Progress in technology would allow us to work less. Productivity advances would allow for the reduction in work hours. And he had this vision of a future where we'd spend more time away from work. Keynes thought work was bad. I think he was wrong in that sense. I think work can be good, but he dismissed work. He thought work, it was just drudgery, toil. And what he wanted to do was create more time for ourselves to be like the lilies of the field, he said. That we have lots of time to create beauty, great art. That's what he wanted. He wanted us to be, writing plays, writing books, composing music, gardening, those sorts of activities which were pursued for their own sake, not for the sake of reproducing society. And he thought that we'd all live better, more wisely in this future. I'm sorry to say it's not going to happen. In 7 years' time, we'll have a working week which is probably similar to the one that we're working now, which is probably for full-time workers around 40 hours. Not great. We're not going to achieve that vision. If we were to achieve it, if we realised a 4-day week, I think the life of our lives would be better. You give the example of the working mum. I think the working mum would hopefully be doing less caring. She'd have the support of her partner to help her with the care work. She might work more than she does now. She might do more paid work. In return, she'd be doing less unpaid work. So there'll be a fairer distribution of work. I think that's my point. An equalisation of unpaid and paid work. I guess just to add to that, the idea that her work outside of the home may be valued more. Yeah, because in terms of changing the valuation of work, potentially could come through the reduction in working time. CEO, team leaders, well, I think they would benefit from having more time for themselves, more time to contribute to the society, potentially contributing with others to creating a more sustainable future, one which is more ecologically sustainable in terms of work time reduction, fitting with climate change mitigation goals. And just generally, we'd live better. We'd work better, we'd live better, we'd have better lives. I think, that vision is one which ought to inspire us. Good to have a good vision, good to be able to think about how we might achieve that, and within that, how work time reduction would fit into that. I think that's important. That's what Keynes gives us, that vision. It's one that I think can still inspire us today.
And you're giving us that vision too, I'd like to add. A thought I just had is I really think that's especially important for CEOs to adopt that 4-day work week and to be a role model. Because what I'm hearing very often, and I just heard it today in a training, was I wouldn't even dare, that was a training on resiliency, I wouldn't even dare to promote resiliency in the workplace as long as my superiors and the CEO doesn't promote the topic, as long as it's not part of their agenda. And I think people in leadership positions really have to go ahead in order to give the permission to others in the organizations or in organizations in general to follow their lead. And I think that's a reflection that needs to happen as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it can make economic sense.
Yeah.
In the sense that, if your focus is just on the bottom line, well, there may be economic returns from it, in terms of creating a more sustainable workplace. Workers burn out, workers quit. There is the great resignation. Work is not working for every worker. And that is to do with lots of factors, but long hours of work are a factor. Just in terms of workplace culture, CEOs have an important role to play there in terms of setting the right culture, creating the right culture, and creating an environment where workers can thrive. And an environment where workers thrive is one that's good for profit, I would guess, rather than a toxic one, which may have benefits in the short run, but it's not sustainable. So, yes, I'd agree. They are important role models. There's also problems here in terms of normalization of long work hours for CEOs. They feel that they have to, it's a sign of status for them in terms of working long hours. Elon Musk is the famous one here, doesn't he? He says, 80 hours. I'm efficient at that level, but 100. Some weeks I'll work 100 hours. I don't think that's a good role model. Sorry, Elon, but I'm not sure it's the best advice to give. It may work for him, but I don't think it will work for everybody else.
I would love for him to hear that. I would really love for him to hear that. Well, thank you very much on this. I'd like to briefly summarize what we've been talking about so far, because I think we've touched on so many topics that I would just like to briefly go back. So where did we start? We basically started with the question, where does your research passion begin? And you say you're passionate about work, and work shaped you. But I think it also inspires you, it drives you, I say it in my words, to rethink work today in order to really build a vision for the future. An advice you gave that I really liked was experiment with it. Experiment with the 4-day work week. See what works with your organization, with your company, and what doesn't. And I think I'd like to add something on that and reflect on the experiment. I think that's an important part to really see how it can work on all levels and on different levels. And I think that's important as well, to see that this kind of concept might work for blue collar, for white collar, for everyone basically, and that it's an invitation. It comes with a lot of benefits. We said that as well. Productivity benefits. We talked about diversity benefits. We talked about health or mental health benefits. So it comes with a lot of benefits, which may even lead to economic benefits. I don't even want to say maybe, but I'm actually sure it will lead to positive economic outcomes. You also mentioned that it can also provide benefits in terms of sustainability, which I think is a very important point, especially in today's discussions about sustainability and how we want to create a sustainable economy. So I think that's important to mention as well. Oh, you said so many wonderful things. I don't want to repeat everything, but yeah, you also mentioned the differences in countries without us wanting to stereotype, but you also gave examples, for example, looking at Sweden, of a country from which we can learn. And you also said that here we can maybe have a look at labor unions and the power people have actually to change something. And I think that's an important point as well, especially looking at Germany. We have unions, they're very powerful. But the question I would raise is, what is their focus? Is their focus a 4-day work week, or is their focus something else entirely? We briefly also touched upon Keynes and his dream for 2030, and you added your thoughts on this as well. And yeah, we ended up with the bad example of Elon Musk and how CEOs can become role models that go ahead and that show what's possible. So I think so far we've had a really great conversation. I'm feeling lighter and enlightened at the same time, going back to your book and the beautiful title of your book. And before we close, David, I would like to ask you, is there one final thought that you would like to share with our audience today? Is there one final advice you want to give?
Well, to have a vision in your head, I think it's important. And use that to inspire you and give you hope for the future. And for me, in terms of that vision relating to work, it would be a vision around embracing work time reduction plus improvement in the quality of the work that we do. So work less, work better would be a good vision for us to keep, a good idea and visionary thought to have in our heads, and for that to inspire us. And those CEOs listening, think about how we might realise that through reforms that they could make in their companies.
Thank you very much. I like that. Work less, work better. Thanks so much for this really great conversation, really enlightening conversation, David. Thanks for sharing your research. Thanks for sharing also your visions and your advice to all of our listeners today. For everyone listening today, you will find more information about Professor Dr. David Spencer's work in the show notes. You will also find links to his work. If you're interested in his book, you will also find a link to his book. And I would like to close today with a question of what's the vision that gives you hope for the future? Maybe you want to comment on this on our Mindway LinkedIn page, because I would really like to know in which way this episode today could inspire you. And please do not forget, if you like this episode today, to subscribe on Spotify and in iTunes for future episodes. And also if there are any kind of topics you want us to touch upon, please comment as well. We are very happy to follow up on your ideas and on your comments. David, thanks for being here with us today. Maybe you want to say a last word.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Hope others will be in some ways inspired or motivated by what I've said. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Then all the best, everyone out there. Enjoy your evening. Take some time off. Enjoy your leisure time. And I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon. Goodbye.